Good morning, everybody. This is Beats for Breakfast. If I asked you to give me 5 puzzle games off the top of your head, you probably wouldn't be able to. However, the Portal series will definitely be included in your list, if you've played it. Puzzle games are surprisingly uncommon, though it's not hard to imagine why. Most games with puzzle aspects have them as a tacked-on afterthought. The puzzles in these kinds of games are usually tremendously shallow and not very creative or memorable whatsoever. For those who don't know, Portal is a series of games that actually center around puzzles. The puzzles are the main pillar of the games, so they can get a lot more in depth with them than most games do. The main mechanic of Portal is, obviously, portals. You use a two-way portal to solve puzzles in this game, and you can decide where to place both ends of the portal, with some exceptions. If you haven't played these games yourself yet, I can't recommend them enough to you. One of the defining aspects about Portal is its art direction. If you're a contrarian, you may even call it a lack of art direction. All the floors, walls, platforms, and other surfaces are mostly just tiles of varying shades of white and grays. Things are extremely simple and arguably disinteresting here. Needless to say, this is definitely unusual as far as most games go. Art direction is one of the core pillars of games in general, so taking a reductive approach to it like Portal did would be a very risky move. Many developers spend a good amount of time and money on their environments and art styles, since immersion is a very important aspect of most good games. With how simple the art style is for Portal, I wouldn't blame you if you might have thought that this was an indie game when you first saw it. Only 10 people had worked on this game, despite it coming from a pretty recognizable company known as Valve. The levels you move through in games are always full of interactables. By that, I mean anything that you can interact with, in the broadest terms. Things like enemies, checkpoints, power-ups, lava, spikes, destructible furniture, or even cuttable grass. You get the picture. When things in the level are not interactables, they're part of the level's terrain. The terrain usually serves no purpose beyond just giving your character a place to stand and walk on, and you'll be ignoring it for most of the time you play. Whenever you do play games, your mind is always working subconsciously to separate and distinguish between terrain and interactables. The art direction in many games makes this harder on your brain, since a lot of the terrain is pretty to look at while serving no real purpose. Good designers will make it easy for players to distinguish between interactables and environment, usually by making the interactables pop more with some special particles and vibrant colors. Regardless, your brain is always going to be doing some extra work to distinguish between terrain and interactables. Believe it or not, Portal's art direction is actually really important to how it works as a puzzle game. At first glance, it may just seem like a decision made out of laziness or efficiency, but that isn't it. Not entirely, at least. Here's the big reveal of the video. Portal's minimalism and its art style helps players solve puzzles more easily. Remember how I just talked about interactables versus terrain? Portal's minimalist art style is very easy to instantly digest for players, meaning that their brains have to work a lot less to distinguish between interactables and terrain. What is interactable and what is terrain is very obvious to the player just from a second of looking at the room. Portal is able to achieve this by eliminating visual noise and eye candy from its art style, giving you more brainpower to focus on the actual puzzle gameplay. Almost everything in Portal is on a very consistent grid. Everything is rotated at right angles, and most rooms have very simple shapes to them. This is very digestible for players compared to if the rooms had more nooks and corners in them, or if the walls and floors weren't at 90-degree angles. On top of the grid-based level design, Portal also uses colors to emphasize its interactables. You can shoot a portal onto flat surfaces that are white, but you can't shoot portals onto surfaces that are black. The game never explicitly tells you this, but you will subconsciously make this connection very quickly in your head. Most of the interactable assets have a stronger color to them or more interesting shape to them, which helps players distinguish them. Buttons are red, high energy pellets are yellow, deadly water is dark green, and so on. All of the assets are very easy to quickly distinguish from the rest of the level. What's even more interesting is how Portal actually becomes less minimalist as you get farther into the game. Test chambers start to become larger and more complex in terms of visual representation. At a later point in the game, you'll be in areas that seem to almost completely throw out the minimalist aesthetic in favor of something that feels more oppressive and cramped. This is actually a really clever way to approach art direction in a game. At the beginning, things look extremely simple and straightforward. The player gets accustomed to all the systems and interactables in the game early on this way. After that, the player is eased into more visually complex environments throughout the game. They won't have to think as hard about the game's interactables at that point, since they'll already be used to them. In a way, making the levels more visually complex is a pretty creative way of challenging the player's puzzle-solving skills late into the game. By this point, you understand how Portal uses minimalism to its advantage. By eliminating visual complexity, Portal manages to make it easier for players to actually focus on puzzles and solve them. This art direction was definitely a very risky choice. It doesn't do a good job at selling the game to people who are just checking it out for the first time. The portals themselves make up for this, since they're really interesting to look at. I imagine this makes the potentially uninteresting art style forgivable in promotional material, at least. Portal 2 would go on to make improvements on the art style while still retaining what makes it so useful. That's a video for another time, though. This has been Beats for Breakfast, and I hope you enjoyed.